July 11th, 2004. A day that began as ordinary and routine as any for the Jenkins family, who resided at the Venetian Isles apartment complex in Lake Park, Florida. But that day would end with a tragedy that changed the family forever. Late that evening, husband and father John Derek Jenkins intended to leave his family's apartment for just a few minutes to walk his wife Kenya to her car. Mrs. Jenkins was preparing to visit her mother at a local hospital. Believing that his home was a safe, secure place, Derek Jenkins had no idea the walk and goodbye kiss he gave his wife would be his last. The couple's two children, 5-year-old Kia and 4-year-old Jalen, were in their beds sleeping peacefully. The kind of sleep that comes to children who are secure in the love of their parents and who know a strong father is there to protect them. Kenya also took comfort in believing her family was safe as she drove away from the apartment. After all, Venetian Isles had been heavily marketed as a safe, secure rental community. But Kenya's comfort was shattered by terrible news she received after she reached her destination.
I said, "You're lying." I said, that's impossible. How can that happen? I just left him. By the time I left the apartment complex and came to my mother's home, the phone rang and my mother-in-law, and she was like, someone just called and said John got shot. I said, how he got shot? I just left.
Kenya raced back to the Venetian Isles apartments where she found the news was even worse than what she was first told. Her beloved husband, Derek, was dead. While Derek and Kenya Jenkins were sharing what was then unknown to them to be their last precious moments together in the parking lot of the Venetian Isles apartments, danger had already crept into the complex through one of its many unsecured entrances. In an apartment just downstairs from where the Jenkins' two children were sleeping, a far more sinister act was unfolding. A home invasion robbery is in full swing. The victim pistol whipped. Several items, including cash, are stolen from the home. Terrified neighbors witness the incident, but are uncertain at this point there is great danger, until shots ring out.
He kind of came out and just kind of paused, and then he looked upstairs, and I seen him reach into his pants, and he turned around and like no lie, like I'm looking at the people here, and the gun was probably like right there. You know, it was right in front of me. You seen the fire come out of it.
After seeing his wife off, Derek Jenkins was returning to the family's upstairs apartment when he encountered the two home invasion robbers making their getaway. During that encounter, one of the assailants raised a handgun and fired 3 shots, hitting Jenkins twice. One of the bullets goes through the victim's heart. Within minutes, Jenkins is dead at the bottom of the stairwell while his assailants flee on foot. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Or was John Derek Jenkins, as some have suggested, in the wrong place at the wrong time? The Jenkins had lived at the Venetian Isles apartment complex for about 8 months before the murder occurred. Like many residents, the family was lured to the complex by advertisements that stated Venetian Isles had security on the property, including a secure perimeter, complete with automatic gates and call boxes at the 2 main entrances on Congress Avenue. The company that created and distributed the brochures which carried those ads touting the property's security was Housing Trust Management, the parent company for Venetian Isles Apartments. The Venetian Isles Apartments did in fact have gated entrances, but neither the gates nor the call boxes were functional at the time Derek Jenkins was murdered. In fact, the gates had been left open since Venetian Isles took in its first tenants, and the gates were left open on July 11th, 2004. The open gates were of great concern to some city commissioners in the town of Lake Park, and those commissioners expressed their concerns to Housing Trust Management that the Venetian Isles property was not secure as promised when the company sought the town's approval for a construction site plan. Moreover, town officials admonished Housing Trust that the open gates posed a security risk. Even if the gates and call boxes were functional, the layout and design of the Venetian Isles complex left the property with a very porous perimeter. Right next to the gates that would have restricted vehicles from entering are open sidewalks that allow pedestrians, including those who are not tenants, to enter the property at will. To make matters worse, some areas of the parking lot are dark at night, creating perfect conditions for intruders to execute crimes of opportunity. Anyone could walk onto the Venetian Isles property with no restrictions, including the murderers of John Derrick Jenkins.
The security in this particular complex, fell far below the standard of care for not only, negligent maintenance by not having the gates that they had there in working order, but also by not having a secure perimeter to keep control of people coming in and off the property, and having some ability of controlling unauthorized access by pedestrians on the property, and by enforcing their own lease agreements that said they have, essentially a no tolerance policy of drug, criminal, or violent activity on their property, and yet the police reports show a repeated pattern of crime at certain people's apartments, at certain buildings within the complex, that would have suggested that they needed to take action steps long before Mr. Jenkins was murdered by a couple of people who were engaged in criminal enterprise and breaking into someone's apartment, as witnessed by one of the tenants that was there in their statement.
Housing Trust Management not only purported the Venetian Isles apartment complex to be safe and secure, the company also added an element to the property which left the impression the property had enhanced security. At the two main drive-through entrances to the property, Housing Trust constructed small structures that closely resemble guardhouses. But those guardhouses were never occupied by an attendant. In fact, Housing Trust's own employees stated in sworn depositions they never knew the purpose of the structures.
Now, there is a what appears to be some type of hut or structure with a barrel tile roof. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
It's just a little room. I
What's
don't
it-
use it for anything.
Okay. Do people refer to it as a guardhouse?
I've never heard of it as referred to as a guardhouse.
What have you heard it referred to as?
We don't really call it anything. We just don't mention it.
Does anybody use it?
No.
Does anyone have the keys to operate that door?
Maintenance does.
And what would they use the keys for?
If they need to get in there, they
What-
can use it.
What purpose would they need to get in there?
There is no purpose to get in there. We don't use it for anything.
In her sworn deposition, the property manager for Venetian Isles at the time of Derrick Jenkins' murder indicated neither she nor any employee at the property had experienced or received any training in providing security at a residential complex. Moreover, Housing Trust provided no directives regarding security in its employee manuals for the property.
And as part of your hiring, were you provided any training?
No.
Did you receive a training manual?
No.
Did you receive any instructions relating to security at the Venetian Isles apartments?
No.
As part of your job duties, were you required to monitor crime trends at the Venetian Isles apartments?
Yes, if I was aware of it.
Is there a written directive telling you that you need to monitor the crime trends at the Venetian Isles apartments?
No.
I notice in your lease there's a provision that says that you all don't provide security. Was that the way you felt about your obligations as a owner of the property or as a management company for the property, that security wasn't Housing Trust Management Group's responsibility?
Yes.
Expert security analysis has concluded Housing Trust Management never intended to keep its promise on security. Renowned criminologist Dr. Randall Atlas concludes Housing Trust's lack of action on security at Venetian Isles starkly contrasts the company's claim of a safe and secure property, and that Housing Trust merely created the illusion of providing security to gain approval for the property's site plan.
They have, the gates are inoperable or broken or enforced in an open position, so there's no way of controlling vehicles on the property. There's no perimeter fencing, so there's no way of forcing how people walk onto the property. And therefore, the property is wide open for any kind of activity that happens at any time for any reason by anyone. So that clearly is a violation of their agreement with the city, you know, that required them to have working gates, required them to have some kind of security presence there, so that in rental communities which are at a higher risk for crime activity, there would be a minimum level of effort and security, you know, implemented to ensure that the residents were not engaged in criminal activity and that people coming on to visit this apartment complex were not engaged in criminal or drug-related activity.
Housing Trust did arrange for a Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputy to live at Venetian Isles, but that deputy was never employed by Housing Trust and therefore not obligated to do any patrols on the property. Moreover, according to Town of Lake Park officials, Housing Trust took a less than adequate approach to securing its Venetian Isles property.
Our captain has been somewhat frustrated with management and how they've approached the issue of crime in that complex. And while I've heard from Mr. Rieger on the project and his concern and what he was going to do, it just seems from talking to our own manager, Paul Carlisle, that they really haven't stepped up to the plate.
If proper security measures had been implemented at the Venetian Isles apartment complex, John Derek Jenkins would be alive today. Housing Trust management was negligent on several points regarding security at Venetian Isles. On providing a gated community with a secure perimeter as advertised, Housing Trust failed. On providing personnel trained in security, Housing Trust failed. On providing security patrols at Venetian Isles, Housing Trust failed. On providing security directives in the employee manual, Housing Trust failed. On providing adequate lighting in the parking lot of Venetian Isles, Housing Trust failed. On preventing the murderers of John Derek Jenkins from entering the Venetian Isles property, Housing Trust failed. The owners and managers of Housing Trust failed on all of these points, fully aware of the potential danger. For months prior to the murder of Derek Jenkins, there were several residential and auto burglaries at Venetian Isles, yet the complex perimeter remained unsecured, and Housing Trust did nothing to improve security.
The issues here is how do you reduce the opportunity for crime on this property, and if in fact they had done perimeter protection and those gates have been working and the gatehouse had been manned and they had been screening the residents for, you know, people who had not been engaged in activity, those people who had been breaking those apartments very likely, or within a reasonable probability, would not have gotten access onto that property, breaking that apartment that then would have subsequently shot Mr. Jenkins. So that shooting is a direct relationship about getting access onto the property to break into that person's apartment, that woman's apartment, and not be challenged before they ever even got to the property.
John Derek Jenkins was not in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was at home at a time when he was expected to be at home with his family. The people who were out of place were Jenkins' killers, and due to the negligence of Housing Trust management, Jenkins and his family paid a heavy price. Housing Trust management is liable for the murder of John Derek Jenkins. Thankfully, Derek Jenkins' two young children did not witness their father's murder. Kia and Jalen were still sleeping in their beds, completely unaware that their father had been killed, and for a brief while they were left completely vulnerable. Even though a year has passed since they last hugged or kissed their father, the children still hold out hope that someday he will awaken from his sleep. And without the comfort they once enjoyed in their father's strong embrace, Kia and Jalen now cling ever so tightly to their mother.
But it's to the point where they don't want me to go nowhere. They don't want me out of their sight because they're afraid that if something would happen to me. I don't want you to die like daddy died or something like that. They're very clingy. They're very, very clingy.
He was a good father. He was a loving father. And it's evident in the kids now, the way they talk about him, they miss the daddy and so forth. So my little grandson comes in every day and the first thing he does is go over and look at that picture, that's my daddy. And, you know, again, that doesn't help my situation very much because, you know, I get a little emotional, but I'm strong for him and I just keep trucking. But he was a good father.
That's my girl.
Oh, Brandon, look what he's eating your favorite what?
Not pizza, macaroni pizza.
Macaroni cheese pizza.
A very difficult lifelong task is just getting started for Kenya Jenkins. She is now a single mother, taking on double parental duties. John and Jessie Jenkins, parents of Derek Jenkins, are also still grieving. After experiencing relief that Derek returned home from active military duty without being sent to Iraq or Afghanistan, the Jenkins were devastated to learn their only son was murdered just seconds away from his own front door.
So that's why I'm still struggling with. It was so sudden and unexpected. I had looked for tragedy, and I always try to set myself in a position wherein I'm on guard for anything. Not that you're prepared for it, but you're on guard. This I was not prepared for at all.
By all accounts, John Derek Jenkins was a model citizen. Jenkins had a deep love for his family and was a wonderful father to his children, including his two sons from previous relationships, Javon and Derek. It was Jenkins' deep devotion to his family that was perhaps the greatest source of admiration among his many friends and family members.
Jenkins was a very fun, loving person, very caring, very giving, and very intelligent man that I saw that loved his family. Always putting them first, always wanted to make sure everything was all right. That's how I knew Jenkins to be. And
I was proud of the father that my son had become, definitely, yes. He was a good kid, he was a good father, and he treated his kids good.
He always wanted all four of his children to have the best education. He was looking forward to the upcoming school year for his son to get into Little League, Little League T-ball or something like that. And him and one of his friends, they actually was talking about becoming a coach, wanting to do something like that so he can spend more time with his son. I think one of the things he talked about that was very special is when she won Little Miss Scalar, and he was there, and I wasn't able to be there because I had to take some college courses, and he said that was one of the most precious things that he ever had to see, was to see his little girl. And he just said, that's just my baby, that's my little girl, my little princess. And my daughter and my husband, they were like the best of friends. It was a bond that you couldn't even break, and that was his only little girl. He said, that's daddy's little baby.
Derek Jenkins loved working with children, especially children with special needs. At John F. Kennedy Middle School, where Jenkins worked as a counselor, teachers and administrators marveled at his talent for helping kids.
I watched him grow, and he just loved those kids, and those kids loved him. And I just felt so proud of him to hear the teachers talk about how well he was doing and how he thought that he was the school.
And even I would say to John, like, man, you really are involved. You really, you putting your heart and soul in this, into this kid or that kid. I like I say, I feel like I go above and beyond, but he would go and have me looking at him like, wow, man, you really are going out to make sure these children have a chance.
A peaceful walk, not in the wrong place, but in what Derek Jenkins rightfully thought was the right place, at home. A peaceful walk ending in pain and shattered dreams. Adequate security at the Venetian Isles apartment complex would have prevented the murder of Derek Jenkins.
This is clearly this was a foreseeable incident, and it was a preventable incident. And had the property management company implemented what the other complexes around them are doing, which is having perimeter fencing and having working gates, which is pretty much standard of care and what normal maintenance practices would dictate, the level of criminal activity on this property in the months preceding and the years preceding Mr. Jenkins' murder would have been minimal, if not just barely a blip on the radar screen.
July 11th, 2004. Under normal circumstances, it would have been an ordinary day for the Jenkins family, but the lack of security at Venetian Isles apartments on that day and months prior was an invitation to society's worst elements. Now, in a very tragic way, every day for the Jenkins family will be forever far from ordinary. Housing Trust Management is liable for the murder of John Derek Jenkins.